So guys, have you ever had your daffodils start to come up like normal? They produce their foliage, their flower stems and buds, but those buds never bloom. They never produce a flower. You eventually notice that they just start to turn brown and eventually they just wither away. Now that is something called bud blast. Now, it's never happened to me before, but it's happening to me now, and I'm pretty bummed about it. Some of my daffodils come up, but in two of my containers, those did not. They did not produce flowers. So I want to talk about that in today's video. So if it's happened to you in the past, hopefully we can prevent it in the future from happening again. Now, I want to go ahead and clarify that bud blast, what I'm talking about today, is not the same as your daffodils coming up blind. Now, bud blast, like I said, your daffodils will come up like normal. They will produce that foliage, that flower stem, the bud never opens up or flowers. Now, with your daffodils coming up blind, you usually don't get any, flower stems or buds at all. You normally just get a bunch of foliage. So again, two separate different things. Two totally different things. Now, if you are having problems with your daffodils coming up blind, then it's probably one or two things. Now, the first one is they may be too crowded, too close together, and they're not able to take in that nutrients, or maybe you have them crowded together in a more, shady location. Maybe they need more sunlight, and so they may not be producing flowers because of those things. So it may be time that you dig those up, separate them out, replant them, give them some room in a more sunny location, give them some fertilizer, and hopefully you'll see blooms once again. Now, the other thing, you may be cutting their foliage back too soon after they have flowered. Now, I know it doesn't look really pretty when there's no blooms and it's only, the foliage, but you have to let that plant take in energy from the sun, take in the nutrients that it needs to form that flower for the next year. So you may not have any flowers the following year because you're cutting that foliage back too soon. So let it turn brown, turn yellow, die back, and then cut that foliage off, and you should have flowers the following year. Now for me, my daffodils are experiencing bud blast. Again, they come up, you think everything's fine, and then they have brown buds that don't produce blooms. And so I think a couple of things happen. You can have that when you have really extreme weather changes, just environmental changes that can really stress out the daffodils, and it usually just happens to certain varieties. So we had here in Kentucky several days of really warm days, like, upper 70s. We were really excited. My daffodils were, coming up. I seen the buds. And then we had several nights in a row with lows down in the 20s and the 30s. And, I was kind of concerned about my plants, but I thought, they're going to be okay. But I don't think that they were okay. So I think that is one thing that happened. Another thing is the moisture. If you have too dry conditions or too moist conditions, this can happen. And so another thing, we had a lot of moisture this year. During the winter with snow, we got a lot of snow, several inches of snow, a little bit more than we normally do. We also had a lot of rain. We would have that in a short period of time. We would have a couple of weeks in a row where we get several inches of rain. So I really do think that it kept the soil moist in my containers. And the reason I know that is because some of my bulbs rotted. Some of my hyacinth bulbs that were planted with these daffodils, they actually rotted. So I really do think that overall my containers really just stayed too moist. And guys, if you're liking this video so far, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Now, I have learned that certain varieties of daffodils are more prone to bud blast than others. Those varieties are the ones that have double flowers, more petals, and the ones that have multiple flowers per stem. And so the ones that I was having trouble with were the ones that are double flowers. And so actually I had some red Devon daffodils come up into other containers. They were just fine. And those are just, you know, regular daffodils. It's just a single flower on a stem. It doesn't have, you know, multiple petals. So again, those did just fine. So I really do think that certain varieties are more sensitive to bud blast. Now, in those other two containers, I planted up the red Devon daffodils, but I also planted Cheerfulness. It's a double daffodil in those containers, and I know those normally bloom a little bit later, so I'm hoping they come up and they're not affected, so we shall see. And then in that same container, I planted some Purple Sensation allium, also a couple of different types of tulips. So I'm really excited that my allium and tulips and my other daffodils will come up and be just fine. We shall see, and I'll give you an update on that later on. Now, if you're still seeing a bud blast, but you're not having crazy temperature changes or excess amounts of, you know, rainfall moisture, then maybe your conditions are too dry. Maybe you need to make sure that you water if you're not getting rain, because that can stress out your bulbs and then they don't want to bloom. And then another thing is maybe you planted your bulbs too shallow. You know, you want to make sure that you plant them about 2 to 3 times their size. So say you have a bulb 2 inches, you want to plant it about 6 inches deep, and that should do the trick. I always like to look on the package instructions when you buy your bulbs. You know, make sure you go by that if you can. Now, if you planted them too shallow, you can always dig them up, plant them deeper, and hopefully they'll bloom for you, you know, the following year. Now, another thing that can cause a bud blast is maybe you're planting your bulbs too late in the season. You know, plant them around November, plant them in the fall. You know, don't be planting them in January. You may have some issues, so try to plant them around the month of November. And another thing that can cause it is improper storage of your bulbs. I like to go ahead and plant mine as soon as possible when I received them from, you know, an online store. When I got these from Walmart, I didn't hang on to them very long. And if you store them, put them in a cool, dark, dry place, but try to go ahead and plant them when you receive them, because normally those places sell them or ship them out to you if you order them online. They do that when it's time to plant in your area. Now, although I'm having this trouble with my daffodils this year, all is not lost. Daffodils are really good about coming back year after year. So what I plan to do is go ahead and just cut off those stems that have the buds because they look really terrible, and go ahead and let that foliage just continue doing its thing, taking in the energy that it needs so that I get flowers next year. And so you can do a couple of different things. Once that foliage dies back and you remove that foliage, you can go ahead and dig up those bulbs and go ahead and store them, and then plant them again in the fall in containers or out into your garden or landscape, you know, your flower beds and things like that. Or you can go ahead and just dig them up and plant them right out, not store them, but go ahead and plant them out into your yard if that's something you want to do. But hopefully, either way, I'll have beautiful blooms next year. Now, since we're on the subject of spring bulbs, I thought I'd share with you a little update on a little experiment that I was doing. Will these bulbs bloom that I stored improperly? I totally forgot about them in my garage. They were muscari bulbs and some miniature daffodil bulbs, and I planted them up in 3 containers. I shared that in a video. You can go back and check it out, as well as the other videos that I did planting up all of my bulbs in the fall. And so again, go back and check out those videos. And so I did an experiment planting those bulbs in 3 small containers, and I was so excited about them. They were doing so well. I think I shared an update during the winter. They were putting on their foliage. It was nice and green and full. Super excited. And then we got all of the rain, and so I checked on the daffodils. They weren't coming up. Again, the bulbs had rotted, and so again, just too much moisture. The muscari foliage was starting to yellow to brown, and they just looked terrible. One container did better than the other one, and so, you know, if I had to go back, I probably would have put the bulbs in my garage, you know, since we're getting too much rain. But you know, you live and you learn, and so hopefully I'll do different in the future. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you check out more of my videos here on my channel. You can click them now, and I'll see you later. Bye.